Welcome to Unschool, where we undoctrinate you from public school nonsense. Heck hath no fury like a single liberal woman. You may have seen in the news already that females seem to be moving further to the left and males further to the right. It's kind of an interesting trend. And people have a wide variety of theories as to why that's taking place. I tend to push more towards the worldview that the education system is to blame. I think that people are buying up this narrative that of social justice, and left wing women in the humanities and social sciences are going for that more than anyone else. And unfortunately, some of them are getting degrees in things that are not going to benefit them very much in their career paths. And I think that's unfortunate. It's pretty sad. And then less and less men are going into college. You're saying, I said in one of my other videos, I think that it appears to be less than 40% now, right? More than 2/3 of college students are now female. But I don't think that will last either. I think that if all the men are leaving, the women will be next. And then, so in the next decade, more and more women will begin to leave the education system. And I really don't see the trends reversing. I think I also, in another one of my videos discussed the fact that more and more corporations are removing the requirement for a college degree. It might be better to do some sort of behavioral interview and decide, hey, is this potential employee somebody who is interested in learning and improving, and then hiring that person and training them up? I think we need a bit of a return to um, not internships, but other things where we I can't remember the word right now, but where we train people to do particular jobs and then they take it on. Apprenticeships. That's the thing. More apprenticeships, I think, would be good in the future, and less degrees that focus so much on identity politics. And as this thing says, host Jesse Kelly told Megan Kelly on her podcast that the mentally ill single woman is the beating heart of the Democrat Party. He proclaimed over 70% of single women vote Democrat. Furthermore, he declared that studies show approximately 60% of those women had been diagnosed with some sort of mental illness. And, unfortunately, a lot of them will say, like, well, it's not just us, it's just that men won't go to uh, therapy. But, if you read much about what it takes to reach to be content or more happy, sublimation is a common theme, right? Where you feel bad, you go and engage in some other activity like exercise, and suppression of emotions, which these leftist humanities students criticize. But suppression of emotions is actually one of the things you're supposed to do, because if you think about mental illness, or you think all the time about how you're unhappy, it will encourage you to be even less happy. That's the unfortunate way in which things work. It's kind of like trying to not think about the elephant in the room. It just leads you to doing it more. So keeping your mind active and engaging in productive activities, these are huge benefits, I think. Kelly, the man, joked that everyone knows a woman with her eyes half bugged out of her skull. She ruins Thanksgiving every time bragging about her 15th abort. Why, that's an exaggeration. Come on. While Kelly's exaggerations made me laugh, I simultaneously thought to myself, oh crap, he's talking about me, or at least who I used to be. And while I've not had 15 or even one, thank the Lord, I have been known to ruin a perfectly fine family event. I mean, that's what happens in Thanksgiving, right? People come together and, discuss politics, even though they're not supposed to. You're supposed to just enjoy Thanksgiving, not bring up your political worldviews, but, some of us can't help it. Failures of a girl boss goddess wannabe. I spent over 2 decades trapped in leftist culture, mostly in Los Angeles, racking up plenty of cringeworthy moments, some still on public display, forever memorialized by the internet. Progressive single women tend to overshare. They also tend to advocate for the idea that you have to perpetually talk about mental illness, which I don't support. I don't think that you should talk about it 24/7. I do think if something really bad is bothering you, that you should go to therapy for sure. head in that direction. See if you can solve some problems. But don't go to a therapist that's not interested in solving problems and just interested in having you pay them $300 an hour for the rest of your life weekly. That's not worth your time. In the circles I ran, there was a lot of talk about being a goddess. We spiritually minded gals were never single through any fault of our own, but because men don't appreciate evolved women who have done the work to be in a conscious relationship. Of course, being dateless had nothing to do with the fact that such work itself, that work lends itself to extreme narcissism and an air of arrogance. Humility is not exactly a defining characteristic of the left. I mean, it's leftists, traditional liberals, and conservatives have some sense of humility. I became convinced that career success would be as fulfilling, if not more so, than being in a relationship or becoming a mother. Achieving independent boss lady status would be my crowning achievement. Newsflash, it has not been. Frankly, it's difficult managing life and all its challenges alone, particularly financial. And I think it's unfortunate people talk about this exclusively in terms of relationships between, with a significant other. There's just been a death of community. I'm looking at the book right now on my desk called Bowling Alone, written by Robert D. Putnam. This is a good book to read to understand the death of community in the West. It says, the collapse and revival of American community. Unfortunately, I don't think the revival has really happened with the younger generations. Boomers are having a terrible time trying to get millennials, who are middle aged now, surprisingly. I'm a millennial. I'm middle aged. I hate to admit I'm a millennial, but I am. I am a millennial. And Gen Z is not super interested, it seems, in joining these groups either. But maybe they'll change. I mean, there's some stuff out there about them being the tool belt generation. They're going to go back to basics, remove themselves from social media and other negative influences, and try to embrace the the basics of life. What's wrong with that? That's great, I think. Frankly, it's difficult managing life. Yeah, as she says, particularly financial. It is easier to manage things financially when you have two people living in the same household, like a mother and a father. Even if only one of them's working, you have someone to help reduce costs by working in the home and so on. The left gives single women like me a lot of rationale to feel better about themselves and the poor choices they've made. The message was that sex without commitment is empowering, despite the very real possibility of it leading to dreadful outcomes. And it doesn't really seem to be the case. A lot of millennials and Gen X have pushed down that path, moved down that path, and has not been empowering at all. While being empowered by a man is never a consequence any woman deserves, women should always be willing to cast a critical eye toward their own behavior. It probably was not the wisest thing for me to do these things I'm not going to read for, because this video is going on YouTube, but you can read it if you want to. But victimhood is a necessary tool of the left, while womanhood is not as high on victim hierarchy as it once was, particularly at a time when many seem to find it difficult to define what a woman is. What is a woman? A human female. It can be difficult. It can still be used to effectively cry foul against the evil patriarchy. Believing that the patriarchy is out to get you is quite socialist. It just isn't the case. Men have had their fair share of suffering throughout society as well. I mean, essentially, most of human beings throughout human history have been born into blood and dirt. Throughout human history, this is very sad, but throughout human history, 2/3 of children died before the age of 6. Look that statistic up if you don't believe me. Up until 1800, and then through the 19th century, just 100 years ago or 120 years ago, roughly. Still, 1/3 of children were dying before the age of 6. We live in a much easier world now. It's hard to fathom such a thing. And it wasn't even that long ago that these horrible things were happening. And we now, apparently, with less hardship, we've embraced the narcissistic worldview. I think that the self-esteem movement of the past 40 years has not been, or 50 years has not been too beneficial in that regard either. There's a great book that I recommend reading called "Why Is It Always About You," which is overall about narcissism, but also in a couple or three chapters or something talks about the the self-esteem movement and how that's been going on for decades. And so it's pretty useful. It can help you understand modern society a little bit better. And as she says here, but of course, there are consequences. It is the depression, unfulfillment, loneliness, and yes, sometimes mental instability that often comes with living a life focused solely on yourself and casting off any sense of responsibility. So, another one of the traits that's useful to improving your mental health is altruism. So, when you're worried about yourself and you're feeling depressed, one of the solutions to that issue is to do something nice for someone else. And that can be quite difficult to do, to force yourself to do such a thing when you're not feeling great. But sometimes it can be beneficial. The flip side of that, if you're a super agreeable person, is you don't want to overextend yourself only doing things for other people. Sometimes you have to make sure that your own health is in a good condition. Under the righteousness is pain and disappointment. Yeah, it certainly seems that way, sadly. It seems to me that the humanities and social sciences in the education system are producing mentally ill people. If you don't believe me, look up the statistics. It's pretty depressing. Social work is pretty low on IQ, like maybe the lowest major in college for IQ and one of the highest for mental illness. But I don't think a lot of these people are going in with high levels of mental illness, but they're certainly leaving with that as they are as they have social justice and critical theory forced down their throats. It's quite unfortunate. But not going to read all of this article, but it could be worthwhile checking out on the Federalist. And this article from AEI.org says the rise of the single woke and young Democratic female. It's interesting that in some places in the West, feminism is declining. I've seen two different polls on the UK from the UK saying less than 10% of people support feminism. But who does, right? The main groups of people are women in their early 20s and women in their early 40s who seem to support feminism, which is interesting. Soccer moms are giving way to single woke feminists, the new SWFs. That is not an abbreviation, right? Anything with the letter W hardly qualifies as an abbreviation. But, anyways, as one of the most potent voting blocs in American politics, unmarried women without children have been moving towards the Democrat Party for several years, but the 2022 midterms may have been their electoral coming out party as they proved the chief break on the predicted Republican wave. While married men and women as well as unmarried men broke for the GOP, CNN exit polls found that 68% of unmarried women voted for Democrats. And surprisingly, once they get married, they tend to not be that far left wing. Like they tend to not move as much in that direction, which is interesting. The Supreme Court's August decision overturning Roe v. Wade was certainly a special factor in the midterms. That's for sure. That definitely affects people's politics. But longer term trends show that single, childless women are joining African Americans as the Democrats' most reliable supporters. Their power is growing thanks to the demographic wins. The number of never married women has grown from about 20% in 1950 to over 30% in 2022. That's honestly not as big of a trend, not as big of a change as I thought it would be. That's actually smaller than I would think. While the percentage of married women has declined from almost 70% in 1950 to under 50%. So that's a bigger change. Some of that has to do with no-fault divorce, I'm sure. Um, women initiate divorces most of the time, and especially college-educated ones. I think it goes from like 70 to 90% or something with college-educated women. Overall, the percentage of married households with children has declined from 37% in 1976 to 21% today. That's pretty big change. A new Institute for Family Studies analysis of 2020 census data found that 1 in 6 women do not have children by the time they reach the end of their childbearing years, up from 1 in 10 in 1990. Also, the average age of having children is in their 30s now. Most women are not doing it until they're 31. Single adult women now total some 42 million compared to the key African American voting bloc, 46 million, and while vastly larger than key groups like labor union members, 14 million, or college students, 20 million. The Pew Research Center notes that since 1960, single person households in the United States have grown from 13% to 27%. Many, particularly women, are not all that keen on finding a partner. Pew recently found that men are far more likely than women to be on the dating market. 61% of single men said they are currently looking for a relationship or dates, compared with 38% of single women. There's clearly far less stigma attached to being single and unpartnered. Single women today have many impressive role models of unattached, childless women who have succeeded on their own, like Taylor Swift and much of the U.S. women's soccer team. Okay. This phenomenon is not confined to the United States. Marriage and birth rates have fallen in much of the world, including Europe and Japan. Well, in Korea, the birth rate is uh, under zero point 0.7 now. So it seems in the next few decades, we're going to be looking at a massive population collapse. People have been concerned about a population explosion. Um, in a bit of a Malthusian way, they seem to think that we wouldn't be able to feed everyone, but that was never the case. And now it seems like it's going to go in the opposite direction. As people get richer, they seem to not have as many children. Singleness is no longer to be sneered at. Never marrying or taking a long term partner is increasingly seen as a valid choice. The rise of SWFs, a twist on the personal ad abbreviation for single white female, is one of the great untold stories of American politics. Distinct from divorced women or widows, these largely Gen Z and millennial voters share a sense of collective identity and progressive ideology that sets them apart from older women. Thing is, they're all going to push for a larger welfare state and bankrupt the country in the process. We need massive reductions in government spending. I wish we could get a Javier Milei to be president of the United States and just start eliminating programs. That'd be fantastic. One paradox, however, Democrats depend even more on women defined in the strict biological sense, while much of the party's progressive wing embraces the blurred and flexible gender boundaries of its identity politics. Attitudes are what most distinguish single women from other voters. An American Enterprise Institute survey shows that married men and women are far more likely than unmarried females to think women are well treated or equally treated. As they grow in numbers, these discontented younger single women are developing something of a group consciousness. Nearly two-thirds of women under 30, for example, see what happens to other women as critical to their own lives. Among women over 50, this mindset shrinks to less than half. Interesting. All in favor, she told Nautilus, it's a tremendously positive thing. Once upon a time, just about everyone in the United States thought that they needed to squeeze themselves into the heterosexual nuclear family box, even if they weren't heterosexual or weren't interested in getting married or had no interest in raising kids. Now people can create the lives and families that allow them to live their best. I guess. Well, apparently, single women can live a life of depression since the single left-leaning women have the highest rates of mental illness, which is sad. In the late 1960s, they were about 30% of college graduates. Anyways, the economics of singleness. While both married and unmarried women have made impressive gains in the workplace, family status appears to be driving a big cleavage in politics among women. Research shows that having children tends to make one more conservative. Yeah, I just said that just a few minutes ago. Critically, divorce does not change this calculus decisively, although it moderates leftism. The AEI 2022 data shows that divorced women of all age cohorts tend to be more conservative than liberal. In aggregate, 23% of divorced women are liberal, while 31% are conservative, and so on and so forth. We are witnessing sociologist Daniel Bell noted a half century ago, the coming of the post-industrial society, a new type of individualism. So, I don't know. It is kind of interesting. Geography is destiny. Yeah, we're going to have massive population decline, potentially. Lower fertility rates, as this article says, and so on and so forth. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens. It'll be interesting to see if that's what continues going forward in the next few decades, or if things change again, because it seems to me that nothing's really permanent. These things tend to change over time. This says data says Americans are becoming more conservative. What's going on? Yeah, weirdly, Gen Z might be becoming more right wing. It's interesting. Earlier this summer, Gallup published some surprising numbers. Even more Americans identified as socially conservative. One of the reasons for this may be, well, twofold. One, right wingers are having more kids than left wingers because the left wing women are deciding not to have children. And two, a lot of the immigrants coming into this country are probably more socially conservative. That tends to be the case. That at any time about a decade, 38% said that they were conservative or very conservative when it came to social issues, as opposed to 29% who said they were liberal or very liberal. A year early, 33% were on the conservative side and 30% liberal. What accounts for the rightward shift? While these numbers tell us something interesting about personal identification, they don't actually tell us all that much about policy. Social issues wasn't defined by the Gallup pollsters, leaving respondents to interpret the term for themselves. But the line between social issues and economic issues isn't all that clear. Is income inequality a social issue, an economic issue, or both? And blah, blah, blah. What primarily seems to be driving the change is the Biden era. So I don't know. That's interesting. Will it be permanent then, or are people just unhappy with Biden's policies? The economy has not been great under Biden. The economy hasn't been great since the financial crisis of 07, 08, and none of our loser presidents on the right or the left have seemed to solve that problem.